All right, we are going to be continuing solving systems of linear equations using the substitution method. Now, if you remember back to yesterday, here's what we do with this. This is how we use the substitution method. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that one of the equations is solved for a variable, meaning when I'm done, it should say x equals yada, 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 or y equals something else. Then what you're going to do is you're going to substitute that equation into the other equation for that variable. There should only be one variable left now because remember when we substitute in, we take that variable out. We solve for that variable. We take that answer now and substitute it back into the first equation for the variable, and then we solve. Your answer will be x comma y. Remember, you can always check your answers by plugging the point in. So when we look at this problem, the first thing you should recognize is none of them say x equals or y equals. So what we have to do to start off with is we have to solve one of these equations for a variable. Now, it is always smart to take a second and look, because if I start off and I say, okay, I'm going to solve this one for that x. Well, the problem with that is then I would have to divide by 5. 5 doesn't go into 16 evenly. 5 doesn't go into 6 evenly. So if I solve for that x, I would have a fraction throughout the rest of the problem. So if I look through there, the smartest one that I want to solve for, or the simplest version to solve for, is I want to solve for the x in the first equation. So to do that, I need to minus 3y. So what I know is x is equal to negative 3y minus 22. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to plug it into the x in the second equation. So here is what we now have. So what I have is I have 5 times negative 3y minus 22 minus 6y, and that equals 16. At that, I would distribute. So I'm going to take the 5, multiply it through, so negative 15y minus 110 minus 6y equals 16. At that point now, I'm going to take and I'm going to add these together. So I'm going to combine my like terms. So negative 15y and negative 6y is a negative 21y minus 110 equals 16. I'm then going to add 110 to both sides. And that would leave me negative 21y is equal to 126. At that then, I'm going to divide by a negative 21. And that would leave me with an answer of y equals negative 6. Okay? So at this point, I know my answer is something negative 6. So now I take that and I plug it back in. So x is equal to negative 3 times negative 6 minus 22. So negative 3 times negative 6 is a positive 18 minus 22. So x would equal negative 4. And that would be my solution to that system. Okay, let's try another one. So if you look here, the simplest one to solve for would be this y, because when I divide or anything, I don't have any fractions anywhere. So I'm going to solve this. To solve this, I would add the 4x to both sides. So I would get y equals 4x minus 14. Now I'm going to take that and plug it in for y. So I have negative 5x minus 3 times 4x minus 14, and that equals 8. So now I'm going to distribute by my negative 3. So negative 5x minus 12x plus 42, and that equals 8. I'm going to combine my like terms, so that would get me negative 17x plus 42 equals 8. I'm going to minus the 42 from both sides. So that's going to give me negative 17x equals negative 34. divide both by a negative 17, and that will get me x equals a positive 2. So at this point, I know my first answer is 2. I take that, plug it back in. So y equals 4 times 2 minus 14. So y equals 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 14. So y is equal to a negative 6. So my solution here would be a 2, negative 6. And that would be the solution to that system. All right, so now we move to the next part here. So when I look at this next problem, I start to look at it and I say, okay, what can I do to make this problem a little easier? Is there any way I can solve for any of them that would make the problem a little bit easier? And the answer is nope, there's not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make my fraction work as easy as possible. So I'm going to solve for this 2y. So to do that, the first thing I would do is I would minus the 3x from both sides. Then I would divide everything by the 2. And so that leaves me with y equals negative 3 halves x plus 5. I'm now going to take that and I'm going to plug it in for the y. So here's what we now have. I have negative 4x minus 5 times negative 3 halves x plus 5, and that equals negative 11. So now I'm going to go ahead and distribute that. So I get negative 4x, negative 5 times a negative 3 halves. That's going to give me a positive 15 halves x. Negative 5 times 5 is going to give me negative 25, and that equals a negative 11. I'm now going to combine my like terms. So negative 4, remember, would be negative 8 over 2. So negative 8 over 2 plus 15 over 2 is going to give me 7 halves x minus 25, and that equals negative 11. I'm going to add the 25 to both sides, and that gives me 7 halves x is equal to 14. Now remember, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal here, and that's going to leave me with an answer of positive 4. And that's for x. So now I take that, plug it in here. So I would go y equals negative 3 halves times 4 plus 5. And that would leave me with 3 halves of 4. That is actually a negative 6 plus 5, which would be a negative 1. So my solution would be 4 comma negative 1. Remember, if the fraction work is challenging and you're having trouble with it, remember how to punch that into the calculator, because you can do the fraction button right on the calculator and it'll do some of that fraction work for you. Okay, let's try this next one then. So if you notice, we got 2 more here. We're going to try this next one. Now, when I look at this next one, there's a couple different paths I could take. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make my numbers as small as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to solve here for this x. And the reason I'm going to do that x is because then when I plug it in, I'm only multiplying it by 2, which will make my numbers a little smaller. So to do that, I'm going to move my 8y over to the other side. So I would subtract 8y. Now I'm going to divide everything by 8. And that would leave me x equals negative y minus 3. So now I take this and I plug into the x. So I have negative 2 times negative y minus 3 minus 8y, and that equals negative 12. So now when I distribute, I take the negative 2. That's going to get me 2y. That's going to give me a plus 6 minus 8y equals negative 12. So now I'm going to combine my like terms. 2y minus 8y is a negative 6y plus 6, and that equals a negative 12. I'm now going to minus 6 from both sides. I get negative 6y equals negative 18. I'm going to divide that by a negative 6. So y would equal 3. So now the first thing I know is I know my y value is 3. I take that, plug it in. So x is equal to negative of 3 minus 3. So that would be negative 3 minus 3. So x must equal negative 6. And that would be the solution. All right, so let's try this last one then. So as I look at this last one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to solve for this y here because when I plug that in, any fraction I have will be eliminated when I plug in and multiply by 4 with the other y. So it'll make some of that fraction work a little easier. Also, the 4 goes into 16. It doesn't go into the 6 evenly, but it still can even simplify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 6x over by adding. So I get 4x equals 6x plus 16. I then divide everything by 4. So I get x equals 3/2 x plus 4. I take that now and I plug it into the y here. So I get negative 3x plus 4 times 3/2 x plus 4, and that equals negative 2. I'm going to distribute. So negative 3x, I'm going to take the 4 times 3/2, and that's going to get me plus 6x. I'm going to take the 4 times the 4, that's going to get me 16, and that equals negative 2. I'm going to combine my like terms. So I get 3x plus 16 equals negative 2. I'm now going to minus 16 from both sides. So that gives me 3x equals negative 18. I'm going to divide by 3. So x equals negative 6. I take that. I know that's the first part of my answer. I'm going to plug in here. So now I get x equals 3/2 times a negative 6 plus 4. So x equals 3/2 times a negative 6. That's going to give me a negative 9 plus 4. So that's going to end up getting me a negative 5 for x. I am so sorry. That should be a y at the very beginning. So that's going to give me a negative 5 for y. And that is my final answer.